Have you ever come across a piece of media so powerful that it completely changed the direction of your life? I don't think it happens very often, but for me it was a comic book called The Walking Dead. These days I hear a lot about people hyperfixating on different fandoms, getting obsessed with something for a few weeks or a few months before moving on to the next big thing. But for me it's different. When I dive into a fandom, I really dive in. I can stay loyal to it for years, and that's exactly what happened when I discovered The Walking Dead. It wasn't the first fandom I was deeply invested in, but without a doubt, The Walking Dead was the one that completely changed my life. I was 15, sick at home, and I had completely messed up my sleep schedule. It was the middle of the night and I couldn't sleep, and I was bored out of my mind. That's when I remembered a show a friend of mine kept talking about, The Walking Dead. I figured I'd give it a shot. I ended up going to bed in the afternoon because I just had to finish season 1. Then I devoured all 3 seasons that were out at the time. I was hooked. But since the show was based on a comic book, I had a choice. Wait for season 4 or find out what happens right now. Of course, I chose the second option, and I was blown away. The comic was even better, the characters were deeper, the story was packed with action, and it was way more brutal. Carl killing Shane and Rick losing his hand during his first encounter with the governor? Those were huge differences from the show, and I loved them. I tore through the comics in just a few days, stopping at the introduction of Ezekiel. And I just needed to learn what happens next, but now I had to wait. But before I get into how the series completely changed the course of my life, let's talk about what made this comic book so special in the first place. The first thing that immediately sets The Walking Dead apart is its black and white style. At first, it might seem like an odd choice. Why remove blood from a story packed with action, blood, gore, and raw emotion? But that's exactly why it works. Without color, the focus shifts to the details, the shadows, the expressions, the sheer horror in the characters' eyes. It gives the story a sense of timelessness. It makes the world feel even bleaker and more oppressive. The Walking Dead isn't just a zombie story. It's a survival horror masterpiece. Then, of course, there are the characters. Rick Grimes, in particular, is far grittier and more ruthless than his TV counterpart. He's not just a reluctant leader. He's a man who slowly loses parts of himself in the sake of survival. But the most striking transformation belongs to Carl. In the comics, he's not just a side character with a few big moments. He's the heart of the story, growing up in a world where childhood barely exists. And then there's Andrea, my favorite character. Unlike the show, where she was taking a completely different and frustrating direction, comic book Andrea is a survivor, the best sniper of the group, and actually, Rick's love interest. She was a fighter, a leader, and one of Rick's most important allies. What truly makes The Walking Dead special is what it explores beyond the zombies. This isn't just a story about survival, it's a story about humanity. It explores the issues of morality, leadership, trust, and the constant battle between who people were before the apocalypse and who they are now. The comic doesn't shy away from difficult questions. How far would you go to protect the people you love? Can a broken society even be rebuilt? At what point do you stop being a good guy? These themes are what kept readers hooked. It's not just about horror and violence. It's about what it means to be human in a world that's fallen apart. One of the arcs that hit me the hardest was Fear the Hunters. The introduction of the cannibalistic group was terrifying enough, but the way it played out was even more unsettling. The moment Rick and his group turned the tables on the Hunters was one of the most intense, satisfying moments I'd ever read. But nothing was more disturbing than what happened with Ben and Billy. Seeing Ben kill his own twin brother without fully understanding what he had done was horrifying. And then Carl, just a kid, took it upon himself to kill Ben in secret. I remember sitting there, staring at the page, feeling numb. I felt genuinely sorry for Carl. Another unforgettable moment was the introduction of Alexandria. After 70 issues of non-stop chaos, loss, raw survival, suddenly stepping into a community that looked like pre-apocalypse suburbia felt wrong. And that's exactly why it worked. Seeing someone casually walk their dog down the street felt almost eerie after everything that the characters had been through. It was the first time I truly felt immersed in the book, not just enjoying the story, but experiencing it alongside with the characters, questioning everything, trusting no one. Oh boy, and then there was Negan. The moment he appeared, everything changed. Nothing could have prepared me for the sheer brutality of Glenn's death. I remember staring at the page, unable to believe what I was seeing. The way Negan was written, so charismatic, so casual in his violence, made him one of the most terrifying villains I had ever seen in any story. And then Ezekiel showed up with a tiger! At that point, I was completely blown away. From then on, reading each issue became a priority. Experiencing the story in small portions made it even more special. Major events hit harder, the anticipation was intense. All-out war, the time skip afterward, the Whisperer's arc, and the way it was teased when many readers believed the rumors were evolving and starting to talk. Issue 144 and the deaths of so many characters at the hands of Whisperers. Andrea's bite, her death, Negan's redemption arc, how believable and how well written it was. I much prefer his final confrontation with Maggie in the comics over whatever they try to do in the show. Like, friends? Really? I didn't even watch the show, I just cannot accept this idea, to be honest. And then, the finale. One of the best experiences any piece of media has ever given me. By then I was living in my hometown of Perm, Russia. Digital copies of new comic book issues became available to the readers of my region at midnight Moscow time, 2 o'clock where I lived. Since it was still the afternoon of the previous day in the United States, American readers who preferred the physical copies usually got the new issues almost a full day later than me. Spoilers were already out, but I chose not to read them. That was the best decision I could have made. I had work in the morning, so my plan was simple. Stay up until 2 o'clock, buy the issue, read it quickly, and go straight to bed. That plan failed. I only realized the issue was 48 pages long when I was about 30 pages in and thought, wow, that's longer than usual. I was so invested in what was happening. Carl is an adult. He's the main character. He's married to Sophia. He has a confrontation with Glenn's and Maggie's son, Herschel. My mind started racing with theories about what was coming next. And then Carl sits down with his daughter and begins reading a book about Rick Grimes. That's when it hit me. Wait, could this be the end? No, that's impossible. The next issues had already been announced. They had release dates, covers. This issue was supposed to kick off a new compendium. There is no way. And then it happened. I turned the page. Carl is smiling, sitting in an armchair with his daughter. I turned the page once again. The end. When I woke up, the news broke. Reddit threads, discussions, everyone else knew it was the finale when they started reading the issue. But I was one of the lucky few who got to experience it exactly the way it was meant to be experienced, and for that, I'll always be grateful. I'll always be grateful to Robert Kirkman, the writer of the series, for making that moment possible. I've read his letter from the first volume countless times. In it, he wrote,
For me, the worst part of every zombie movie is the end. I always want to know what happens next. Even when all the characters die at the end, I just want it to keep going. More often than not, zombie movies feel like a slice of a person's life, until whoever is in charge of the movie gets bored. So we get to know the character, they have an adventure, and then, boom! Just as things start getting good, those pesky credits start rolling. The idea behind The Walking Dead is to stay with the character, in this case, Rick Grimes, for as long as humanly possible. I want The Walking Dead to be a chronicle of years of Rick's life. We will never wonder what happens to Rick next. We will see it. The Walking Dead will be the zombie movie that never ends.
For years I kept wondering, what does he mean, a zombie movie that never ends? How is it even possible? And then Robert Kirkman did it. I finished the final issue, I read his goodbye letter, and I didn't even wonder about what happened next. The finale was so unexpected and so perfectly executed. It gave me closure in a way I didn't think was possible. Looking back, the clues were there. Not long before the issue's release, the cover for volume 32 was revealed. Traditionally, the rumor on the right side of the cover was always incomplete. Its missing half appeared on the cover of the next volume, but this time it perfectly matched the cover of the very first volume. A clear sign that the book was coming to an end, and yet, the thought never crossed my mind. Of course, the series had its flaws, and the finale wasn't perfect, but I'm not here to criticize it or break it down piece by piece. I want to talk about how this book changed my life. Some details might seem unnecessary, but trust me, they matter, so just bear with me. Let's go back to the night I first watched The Walking Dead. I was 15, with no real hobbies, not too many friends, I had no goals. I felt completely lost, unsure of what to do with my life, and that changed very quickly. Here's an important detail. I didn't speak English at all back then. And the comic book wasn't officially published in Russia, so my only option was to rely on enthusiastic fans who translated the issues into Russian. I found an online community where they share these translations, and for the first time, I had a place to discuss the series with others. Then came issue 121, the beginning of Old War Part 2. That's when the community's translator decided to quit. Without thinking much about it, I decided to try translating the issue myself. The problem? Well, I've already said it. I knew zero English. Then I copied every line of dialogue into Google Translate. Then rewrote the clunky machine translation to something that sounded natural in Russian. I'd always loved reading, and my writing skills in Russian were quite strong. So I genuinely enjoyed the process. When I sent my translation to the admin of the community, he actually published it. I also mentioned that I was willing to keep translating, and soon after he assembled a small team to handle future issues. That's how I met a few people who would become my good friends, both online and in real life. Our translators were great at English, and my job was to make sure the dialogue sounded natural in Russian. I became so invested that before long, I was running the entire community by myself, and I was the one who coordinated the whole translation process. My goal was simple: to get the latest issue to Russian-speaking readers as soon as possible. That meant I wouldn't sleep on release nights. I would edit the issue, I would wait for the letterer to finish the formatting, and then I would go through every tiny little mistake I could find to fix it. I often finished at 5 a.m., got a couple of hours of sleep, and then dragged myself to school. I wanted to fully understand the story myself, so little by little I started learning English, not for school, not for the exams, but purely so I could read The Walking Dead in its original language. Each issue became a milestone. With every release, I understood more and more. By issue 142, I realized I could just read it without looking up many words. That's when I found my new passion: English. And just like that, my life started to change. So I enrolled in university and started tutoring in my free time. In 2020, I finally left my hometown. I'd always dreamed of moving to Moscow, but one of my friends I'd met through the Walking Dead community had recently relocated to St. Petersburg. We chatted a lot back then, and when he suggested splitting an apartment, I took the chance. It would save me money on rent. It was also my first time meeting an online friend in real life. And since another one of my Walking Dead friends lived in Moscow, we were finally able to meet too, thanks to the high-speed train he even visited me in St. Petersburg a few times. On the second day in the city, I landed a job teaching English at a language school for adults. And if I moved to St. Petersburg because of The Walking Dead, and I started learning English because of The Walking Dead, then technically, I got the job because of it too. The job, however, was a nightmare. Low pay, exhausting workload, and a management team that treated teachers terribly. I lasted a year before deciding to leave. The school had already cycled through 3 different teachers, and the employees weren't happy with any of them. The school was on thin ice. This was their last chance to keep the contract. And they sent me. The employees actually enjoyed the classes. I ended up staying with them. So when I quit the school and went freelance, that same company started paying me directly and became one of my biggest clients. If you think about it, the entire chain of events, the move, the job, my transition to self-employment, my financial stability, can all be traced back to The Walking Dead. Flash forward to 2022. The war began and I knew I had to leave. I had no idea where to go first, but the IT company that I worked with was relocating to Tbilisi, Georgia. I wanted to keep working with them, so I followed. And since my journey as an English teacher started with The Walking Dead, this comic book is the reason why I ended up here in this country. Every person I've met, every night out, every experience I've had over the past 3 years, it all traces back to that one book that pulled me in so deeply. Saying goodbye to Russia was also special thanks to The Walking Dead. My passport was expired, so before heading to Georgia, I spent a couple of months in Kazakhstan, where you can go without a passport. The route took me through Siberia, where one of our team members lived. That's where I finally met him in person. Then, while visiting Russia for the last time to pick up my new passport, I had a layover in Moscow. That's when I finally met the rest of our team. They came to the airport to see me, and we spent a few wonderful hours together. A dream that 15-year-old me once had, meeting my online friends, had come true. One of my final days in Russia, I was no longer just a kid behind the screen. I was there, with them, in real life. And the connections didn't stop there. The friend who used to visit me in St. Petersburg then moved to Armenia. And since then, we have visited each other a few times a year. Our countries border each other. So here I am, 12 years later. I have a degree, I have a set of valuable skills, I have friends who have been with me for years. I work remotely, which gives me the freedom to move from place to place. And because of that, I was able to immigrate in the first place. And it all started 12 years ago, when a sick, sleepless 15-year-old stumbled upon The Walking Dead. I think about this butterfly effect a lot. What would my life have looked like if that one night had never happened? And where else will this chain of events take me? I will have to see. But for now, all I can do is thank Robert Kirkman for this story, for all the nights spent reading it, for every pivotal moment in the story that made me feel something, for setting me on the right path, for the choices I got to make, for changing my life forever.